In Effect and Cause, whenever enemies are on the opposite timeline to you, they're put in this frozen state. In this state, they can't die, but they can take damage. If you do somehow manage to damage them like this, and do enough to the point that it would kill them, once they get unfrozen, the game will kind of half treat them as if they have been killed, and weird things can start happening. The easiest way to do this is by using any weapon that does damage after a delay, such as most grenades, and then switching timeline right after using it on someone. The enemies that you hit will keep appearing to take damage infinitely past the point of death. After swapping back, the enemy will still be alive, but they will die the next time they get hit by anything at all, or anything kind of updates their health in any way. This includes things that normally would not damage them, such as other friendly bullets. The enemy will also no longer be able to be executed. Things get funnier with other enemy types though. If you do it to a mrvn, it will actually become sad for a short time before going back to normal. This is interesting because you never normally see this happening when damaging them. Normally their screen just switches off instantly, probably because any hit you can do to them normally just kills them instantly. Any enemy that has these team coloured lights will just have them be switched off. Putting ticks into this state will make them no longer explode when walking up to you. They can still explode when shot or when jumping though. You can also do it during their explosion charge up animation, and they will start moving around with the charge up effect, still not exploding. Doing this with a Titan will keep on creating camera shakes over and over every time they get hit after the point they should have died, which can look very funny. When a Titan is in the half-dead state after swapping back, they will look as if they are doomed, their name and health bar will be completely removed, and then like everything else, they will always die to the next hit that they take. With Titans, this means they can be killed by things like non-critical hits with a pilot weapon, although you won't see a hit marker unless you hit them with something that would damage them normally. On BT, there is a flatline that you can never normally pick up because it spawns underneath the map. It is technically possible to reach it with some out of bounds stuff though. If you export the map file, you can see that the flatline is trying to be placed inbounds, next to this grunt with the shotgun. But it's too far inside this rock, and so every time the map loads, it gets sent through it and falls onto the invisible floor. The LStar has a weapon mod that is impossible to get anywhere except through the console. It's called Reload Test, and it doesn't seem to do anything other than changing the animation for when you overheat it, cutting down on a lot of the faffing around parts of the reload animation. Another mod called Old Kick also changes the recoil animation to this, and it looks really stupid. There are actually a ton more unused weapon mods, but none of them are really that interesting aside from these two. There is a random trigger just outside the map in BT that just deletes things as soon as they touch it. It gets specifically set up to do this in script, but then it never gets used for anything and just sits here where nothing can reach it. There are two more pillars in this area of Effect and Cause 1 and 3 that have weird culling and half disappear from certain angles. Like the one in Chapter 2, doing this reveals that there are stalkers sitting inside. I missed a few more spots where you can see out of the map. For example, this little frame in Affecting Cause 2 doesn't have any collision. You can look out of bounds through it, and even throw stuff through it. The opening areas of Chapter 1 are particularly bad for this kind of thing. At the very start, you can turn around after leaving the opening vent and quite easily see weird geo that just ends abruptly. This isn't actually the vent you come down, it's this random other vent. You can come over to this window after the time swap and quite comfortably see some out of bounds geo from the previous room. BT standing in the void, Anderson's corpse, and these ceiling thingies that just attach onto nothing. You can also see a bit out of bounds from this other window and from the lecture hall. This big corridor is the worst offender in the entire game by far, and I'm kind of shocked that I never noticed this earlier. Without even doing anything specific, you can see tons of out of bounds geo outside the windows, and you even get to see where the massive cliff face just cuts off. The very end of this room also has a bit of ceiling that's missing its glass texture in one timeline but not the other. You can't climb out of it though. The beacon hub map has this hole right near the starting area of Chapter 1. There is an out of bounds hole under the road here that you normally have to sacrifice yourself to see. However, backtracking onto this floating rock in the escape sequence not only reveals that it has a ton of missing collision, but also lets you see that hole without dying. In the Blood and Rust Canals area, you can climb up to this spot and see above everything into out of bounds geo. You can do the same thing with this little ceiling pipe right after, but it's really finicky to do. This one is kind of funny because it lets you see some leftover dev textures. The targeting room before the Slone fight also has some weird spots. And so do these spots in Abyss. There are at least 2 missing textures in Titanfall 2. These pebbles are floating. Some of this game's cube maps are weird. Cube maps are basically automatically generated textures that sample an area of the map that the game then uses to draw some of its static reflections. They can be seen more clearly by giving yourself a weapon called Weapon Cube Map. On Blood and Rust, for every cube map reflection up until you get into the first control room, the big structure in the skybox will be in the wrong place. It's supposed to be directly behind the entrance, but it's off to the side instead. This happens because this level actually has two different skyboxes, which are both the exact same thing but with the building in different positions, and they get silently switched around as you go through the level to make your surroundings look slightly nicer. The cube map textures seem to just always use the second skybox. Part of the way cube maps work is there are a series of entities placed in the level, called env cube maps, that act as sampling points for generating a new reflection texture for that area. When you're in-game, objects will use the texture from whichever one of those entities is closest to it. In Abyss 2, this ends up causing problems. Since the dome arena that you get teleported to at the end of that level is stored out of bounds relatively close to where the final assembly platform is, as soon as you reach that part of the assembly line, surfaces will start using the reflections from the arena, even though you're nowhere near that point yet. This fixes itself during the big platform ride, where things eventually get out of range of that entity again. This is the same kind of principle, but this time I don't understand how it happened. Almost all of the water reflections throughout BT use the cube map from the central area, meaning if you're paying attention, you can find gigantic upside down BTs inside all these puddles, even if you aren't anywhere near him. This is definitely not the closest env cube map to all these puddles, so it's difficult for me to imagine how this could have happened without being done manually. Maybe it's to do with some copy and pasting, but I really don't know. In Effect and Cause 1 and 3, the cube map in the reception area is not placed very well, and it causes half the texture to show outside the map. There isn't anything wrong with this one, but I just think it looks funny. In the fold weapon, the cube map for this little outside area uses the skybox from the very end of the level where the planet is exploding. This means you can see some unreal foreshadowing if you look in some of these reflections. Bravo, Vince. This is also technically true for a couple of the places that get used in the end credits cutscene, but it's basically impossible to notice at all. Blackwater Canal's cube maps consistently have this outlined blue object in them that kind of looks like the Harvester from Frontier Defense, although I'm not 100% sure that's what it actually is. Meadow's cube map for this room contains the objective thingy from Amped Hardpoint in the places where these boxes are supposed to be. The Reaper and Tone that you see just before the Ash fight both have some special properties. The tone overrides all difficulty settings and gives itself really bad accuracy no matter what. Next to the line that does this, there's a comment that says, "I said across her nose, not up it," which is a reference to the 1987 film Spaceballs. The Reaper is always put on very low health as soon as it spawns, and then it gets told to ignore all other enemies on the map, meaning it will never actually attack you. The idea here is probably that you're supposed to get it to nuke explode on Ash and do a ton of damage to her. You can also tell this by the fact that if you kill Ash without destroying this Reaper, the Reaper just automatically dies anyway. These stalkers are also given the exact same properties as the Reaper, and also suicide after Ash dies, even though they basically have no use. The only reason I know they do this is from looking at the scripts, otherwise I definitely would never have noticed. Normally the Braxton ship is scripted to get destroyed in this big explosion. However, there is a really easy way to save it from dying. All you need to do is just progress to the first gun platform before the explosion happens, which only really requires basic movement, and then it just never does, and it stays on the map for the entire rest of the level. The most interesting thing that happens as a result of doing this is that you can fly inside of it when piloting the Malta later on. It actually still has an out of bounds timer attached to it, which can kill you in very goofy looking ways. The 6-4 members standing next to you will also actually collide with it and get pushed around outside of the room. Unfortunately, the 6-4 fix themselves when you start the fight, and the Braxton actually flies back to its default position, so the silliness ends here. In the opening fold cutscene, the timing of Blisk's animations can get thrown off if you instantly select a dialogue option when he prompts you. Normally with the little twirl he does, he would react in time to BT's swipe like this. If you answer him too quickly, he does it preemptively instead, and it looks pretty silly. For a really long time, this window in Angel City used to just have no collision at all, and you could climb into this out of bounds room. This was fixed in that one weird update in 2023, but they still left a gap in the middle that you can send things through to this day. The Mozambique can deal damage to Titans even if it doesn't get a critical hit, but only if you're in the campaign. This looks like it was an accident because it's kind of weirdly specific. Blood and Rust has a mapper signature Easter egg that has only recently been documented for the very first time. It's difficult to see properly because it's inside a big death timer and you have to be pretty good at wall climbing. It's difficult to narrow down who the D and T are supposed to be, because this level had a ton of different people who worked on it who could fit those initials, but here's the list of suspects. There is a second, more obscure Roysowitz mapper signature on the map Crashsite. It looks the same as the one on Complex, but way less people seem to know about this one, myself included until just now. Taking certain route deviations can sometimes cause dialogue to not play properly. A lot of these were recently found in Beacon 3 because it came up in speedrunning, after we found strats that were fast enough to have to wait for the dialogue to end later on.
Alpha 1-4, we are diverting forces to assist. ETA 3 minutes.
Pilot, the module is in the projector of that dish. Anti-Titan squads have arrived, requesting assistance.
When these prowlers shove this guy and he starts floating down the river, he just completely disappears around this corner. However, when BTs start scanning all the dead bodies later, it reveals that he is actually still there. He's just underneath the floor. The entire second throw up to the dish and the faffing around in the vents can be skipped very, very easily if you just climb up the side of the building. Although this kind of thing would normally softlock, surprisingly none of the sequence has any required flags, so you can just continue on your way after. I'm honestly amazed Respawn never caught this. A similar place exists in Blood and Rust, where none of this really big combat section is required at all, because the control room is always just sitting there and is open from the very start of the level. These trees are floating. Some of these yellow container thingies are placed underneath the floor where it's impossible to see them. The same thing is true for this tree in Homestead. Whenever you start a run in the Gauntlet, if you look closely you can see that the target people look like normal NPCs for a split second. These wooden weapon racks in the Gauntlet always exist, even well before they actually get lowered down visually, which leaves a ton of invisible walls basically sitting all over this area if you go there early. In the tech test, these apparently used to work like normal moving platforms, and so this wasn't an issue, but they changed it to this because it was just really janky, and it was also possible to get crushed under them. I couldn't confirm this for myself though, because I don't have the tech test. The next 4 were a couple of quick corrections. One time I said that getting all kills on Blood and Rust is technically impossible because of this big concrete cube out of bounds that has an enemy drop on it for some reason. It turns out I was wrong because if you stand up here you can just about get a shot on him at the moment he leaves the ship. It's still really hard and obscure though. I also talked about how to get the glitched Slone fight, and I gave a really complicated reverse trigger order setup for it. It turns out there's a much easier way of getting it, which is to play the level normally, but then right before the fight, go really high up over this area before you go into the room. This causes you to miss a required trigger and technically does a sequence break, and so you'll get the glitched fight when you enter the room. One of the many crashes in this game is done by switching off of Legion to a different Titan loadout and then using Core immediately after. It turns out this also works in the exact same way using a tactical ability. meaning you don't need to have core ready to do the crash and making it a lot more likely to stumble into casually. There is a fallback to a Titanfall 1 execution animation that you can only see by spawning and executing a boss on a level that isn't supposed to have a boss execution. In the past, I've said this was only possible to see by cheating. However, it turns out it can be seen in vanilla gameplay in one very specific circumstance. This is not a very well understood phenomenon, but every now and then Viper can reach 0 health and just not start his death sequence, causing him to actually be in a doom state. The level does continue normally if you bring him to 0 health again, however from this rare state, it is just about possible to melee and execute him in the air, which causes the fallback animation. Since this does also properly kill him, the game crashes. If you use a grav star on a grunt that is riding a zipline, he will not get affected by the gravity pull, but he will still play the animation as if he was, while still going down the zipline. After the animation ends, he also never goes back to doing the zipline animation, and instead just stands up the rest of the way. This also technically buffs him a little bit because it gives him his weapon back early. For some reason, this checkpoint that you get after you reach the balcony before the dome assembly can sometimes cause your screen to just shake really violently when you load it.
体育扫描显示圆顶上方是你最佳的出路，我建议你想尽办法也要上去。
真令人佩服，铁弟，你居然撑到这里来了，真不信这里真是好出路，你得还是动一动。
Effect and Cause has this feature where if you kill an enemy in the past, a decayed version of their body will then be visible in the present. But by looking in the code, we can see how this really works. It just spawns in the corresponding model in a position around where the enemy was when they died, but then it only waits until the next time you time swap to actually make it visible and give it physics. Since that takes a little bit of time to happen, it looks kind of funny and illusion breaking if you keep looking at the place where you killed them the next time you time swap. If you put your game on low ragdoll quality, this whole feature is supposed to get disabled. However, if you do the same thing, you can see that the body does technically still get placed, and it also still gets unhidden for a very short time, causing a little flicker on the ground. Since it only takes into account where the enemy was at the moment they first died, using anything with knockback will cause the bodies to be desynced from each other. Since this receptionist mrvn has a corresponding version of itself in both timelines, you can kill it in the present, go back in time, kill it again, and then swap back to the present to end up with 2 corpses of the same thing. There are a few places in the game where BT teleports to catch up with you. Nobody really knows why, but these teleports can sometimes just not work, often leaving you in weird situations. Most people think it's to do with him being occupied in an animation of some kind, because it seems to usually coincide with him being in combat. In the beacon there is a helmet here. Across the 2 chapters that this helmet appears in, it can get messed up at multiple points, because it never accounts for the dish being tilted differently. For the entire first chapter, it's just suspended up here and is really weird to pick up. When they try to restart the dish, it then becomes normal up until you do the module replacement, which breaks it again, now really far out away from the dish. The Dome Arena fight has a really subtle anti-cheese mechanism associated with this roof. There's a trigger here that makes it so if you're standing inside of it from the exact moment that the first Reaper starts coming up, and then stay inside of it for 10 consecutive seconds afterwards, it will take the closest spectre to you, and then the closest spectre to that spectre, and forces both of them to attack a specific point behind the trigger. If the 10 seconds is broken at any time, the mechanism will never have any other opportunity to trigger again. Calling it a 10-second timer is also kind of an oversimplification, because it actually checks 5 times in 2-second intervals. So you can dip in and out briefly, and it will still trigger as long as you were inside it for every instance of it checking. I tried doing this fight with the anti-cheese disabled, but I honestly couldn't tell you what Respawn's beef was with this specific roof. It seems fine to me. This one specific mrvn in Beacon 3 can be mantled on. I have no idea why, and no other mrvn in the entire game has this interaction to my knowledge. I've already talked about the no magazine visual bug that can happen if you reload to a certain point and then get given a full clip by the game. I said it was possible in a few other places in the game, but I never actually showed them, so here they are. For this one, you need to take advantage of a specific thing in the reload tutorial. When you first go here, all the weapons on these racks don't have any ammo in them. After the game prompts you to reload, as long as you've at least started reloading one weapon, the game will then give full ammo to every other weapon that's on the racks. But it only does that once it starts the aimed on sights tutorial, which happens a slight delay later. You can therefore use this small window of time to get the bug on any weapon with a reload animation where the magazine drops out quickly enough. In the developer commentary video for the Gauntlet, one of the devs says that the Nessie plush Easter eggs were a hallmark of every level that Chris worked on.
That's a good one. This is one of the hallmarks of every level that Chris works on. He always has stuff like this because he does this in every game he plays. With
this information, we can estimate that these are all the levels in the game that Chris has worked on. This strange model can be found floating around the back of the module dish in the beacon. This is an editor reference model that was mistakenly left visible. In this case, it's being used to represent the entity origin of the sticky out bit of the dish. After finishing the Viper fight, the game forces you to disembark for a fastball. Disembarking in a particular area of the ship a bit further back will cause BT to make the goofiest pathfinding decision of all time.
收到，登上天龙星并守护盛会，我们会准备好移动。
库珀，我要扔了。
It is also possible to have him just teleport. The Gauntlet's Titan pedestal sequence takes away all of your ammo. When this happens, there is an entire function that is supposed to take away an LStar if you have one picked up, and if doing that would leave you with no weapons, it gives you back a P2016 instead. This was done because the LStar's little screen display would whine about you not having ammo, and would be kind of distracting. The weird thing about this is that it's completely impossible to see it happening normally, because there isn't any way of actually getting an LStar in this level. The part where it gives you the P2016 instead is even more doubly impossible, even if you could have an LStar, because you always have a starting weapon held by the time you actually reach the part of the level with all the pickups, and I can't think of any way you could possibly lose one of those weapons. Here are 2 more out of bounds spots where you don't have to do anything special and you can just casually walk out of the map. Sometimes an entire ship can just randomly fly through the Malta control room, and it can even run you over and kill you. This only happens very rarely though, and there is no known way to manipulate it.
What the fuck? What? What the fuck? Clip!
Similarly, after jumping over to the 6-4 ship, Barker can have a chance to just fly straight into you. If you did the skip, this can crash the game because it forces you to touch the trigger on BT's hand and tries to start the fastball animation. One of the game's scripts contains a code comment that links you to an internal document at Respawn that was being used during development. It's said to contain documentation and instructions for how the RUI system works, which is the system the game uses to render most of the UI that you see during gameplay. No one has been able to see the document though, because it's set to private and they've never responded to any request to access it. When you do the clip outside this cutscene that I've talked to death in these videos, normally it puts you outside like this. However, if before doing it you move so that you're standing on either one of these little elevated bits, instead of putting you in the usual place, it puts you in gay baby jail. The Spectre fight before the final battery insert has a failsafe mechanism. Starting from the moment they spawn in, if the downward distance between you and any given Spectre stays bigger than 256 units for 30 seconds straight, the Spectre will just automatically die.
是 IMC 无人侦察机，敌军援军往这里来了，我们必须立刻完成神经连。
This was done to prevent situations where the Spectres could get stuck and never come down from the cliffs. It doesn't seem possible to trigger this without cheating though, because there isn't any known way of getting the spectres stuck up there, nor is there any other part of the level that's low down enough to keep that height difference while being reachable quickly enough. As you first exit the crashed ship in BT, there's a piece of debris in your way that you can get stuck on and is fully solid, but is completely invisible until you look at it from underneath. This is just some more faulty backface culling, but right out in the open this time. There's also another instance where you can see the backface culled side of the ceiling inside the ship. It looks pretty much exactly the same as one that I showed before, but it's in a different room from that one. I don't really know what's going on here, but the dome platform assembly sequence can become very broken if you reach this part super quickly.
Oh, I was still fast enough to get this though? That's kind of surprising.
While you're on the big platform ride that takes you into this area, once you pass this corner, there is a sound that is hard-coded to get played on these crane arms roughly 42 seconds later. Meanwhile, up in the dome, there is a trigger that instantly deletes some entities below the dome when you touch it, and this includes the crane arms that want to play the sound. That trigger becomes active once the player has progressed past all the assembly animations. This is extremely difficult and convoluted to do, but that means if you hit the trigger to start the sound timer and then finish the entire assembly sequence in less than 42 seconds, the cranes will get deleted before they actually play the sound, and once the 42 seconds are over, the game crashes. Trial by Fire's elevator sequence can be bypassed very easily with some observational skills and a bit of movement to beat out the death timer. Doing this lets you break the level's triggers quite a bit.
前推进，不能让圣柜离开那艘船。上船得跟着他们。
别让他们逃走了。
In this area of Abyss, a bunch of big rocks are scripted to fall down from the ceiling. However, the rocks will only do this if you're looking at the place they come from while standing in a certain range. The range that you have to be looking in is actually pretty small, so if you just look a bit down like this, you can make it so they just never fall. Getting to each of the platform pickup points in Abyss 2 before the first platform ever reaches them will let you see a variety of visual bugs, as the game assumes this is a safe time to set them up for the rest of the cycle.
不付钱可不是要你耍小聪明的，必要时就把那地方毁掉，懂吧？布里斯克通话完毕。
Even if you don't get there any earlier than normal, the visuals for the final assembly point are still broken and don't make any sense. In these same areas, there are also a lot of places where if you stand in a specific spot and wait for the platform to cycle, you can start to get moved around weirdly. Most of these are caused by the series of these little component things teleporting back and forth to create the illusion of there being an infinite amount of them. Interacting with them as they're doing this causes weird things to happen. In the final platform area, it's possible to do this in such a way that you just appear out of bounds. Most of these balconies in the big factory area follow this formation with doors on either side. There is a specific building where the same thing was copied and pasted, even though one of the doors doesn't line up with anything and it looks really out of place. When Kane dies, there are a few set places on the map that he will always try to die in. If he's far away from one of these places as he dies, he just kind of walks over to the closest one before continuing with dying. This behaviour is so hard-coded that it also works from the other side of the planet and doesn't care about collision. Another thing that Kane's death does in the background is that it specifically tries to untrack any smart weapons that were locked onto him at the time he died, meaning the smart core will lose him as a target even before he actually dies for real. There is no way of having smart core at this point in the game, since it only unlocks in the very last level, which makes this behaviour unseeable. In order to start the elevator fight in Affect & Cause 2, the game requires you to have looked at the elevators while in the past at some point. However, only one of the elevators actually counts as looking at the elevators, which is this one on the middle right. This means that when entering the room, if you swap to the past very late and go for one of the other elevators, you would never have actually been far back enough for the elevator that works to have been in your field of view. And this can lead to situations where it feels like the elevator is just never opening, even though you're standing right in front of it. While in the infinite flight core glitch that I've talked about before, one quirky thing with it is that it actually recognises your primary weapon's swap bind, which is normally not a thing in Titans. This can be done by using any ability that holsters your weapon temporarily, and then using the primary swap bind while you're using that ability. This lets you use whatever primary weapon was on the Titan loadout that you had before you started doing infinite flight core, and then using any ability that lowers your gun again will put you back on flight core again. This could actually be very useful, although it hasn't really been implemented yet in the route. If you play as Palpatine and try to use Force Lightning on the monkey, the game crashes.